Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed at 1,000 subscribers. I'll be posting a special video. My brother came out in the middle of dinner. I'm Maya, 22, and the air just stalled. Eli set his fork down and looked straight at our parents. Mom stopped chewing mid-bite and Dad's eyes locked on him. He cleared his throat and said, "I am gay." The words sounded simple and heavy at the same time. I waited for someone to laugh so I could breathe again. No one moved and the silence felt sharp enough to cut. Dad finally pushed his chair back and it scraped hard across tile. "You are not serious," he muttered as if volume could fix it. Eli met his stare and my heart kicked like it wanted out. I knew right then this would not be a tiny argument. Mom set her fork down with this careful slow motion that screamed panic. "Why are you doing this now?" she asked without looking at him. Her knuckles had gone white on the edge of the table. I pretended to study my plate even while my pulse hammered hard. Looking back, I know I should have spoken first for him. In that second, though, I just tried to shrink out of sight. It felt like any word from me could blow the room apart. So I stayed quiet and watched everything tilt toward some high ledge. Dad pointed his finger at Eli like it was a weapon. "You are not gay," he said, and each word landed like a slap. Eli did not drop his gaze, and that only fed the fire. I watched Dad's jaw clench tighter and knew we had crossed something. Eli took a slow breath and said, "I am done pretending. This is who I am, and I am tired of hiding." The word hiding hung between us, like someone had opened a secret door. I realized he must have practiced this speech alone for weeks. Mom shook her head over and over like she could undo sound. "Stop it," she whispered, and her voice came out thin and sharp. "You are not bringing this into our home and our lives." She looked at me, then like I had already agreed with her. I wanted to crawl under the table and vanish from that gaze. At the same time, something hot sparked in my chest for Eli. It felt wrong that he had to stand there alone like some stranger. I still did not move, and that is the part I replay most. Dad finally cut through everything with a flat, tired-sounding sentence. "If you choose that life, you do not live in this house." He did not shout, and somehow that calm scared me more. It sounded like a rule he had carried around for years waiting. Eli blinked a few times, and then this crooked, almost amused smile appeared. "So that is it?" he asked, and his eyes filled fast. "You throw me out and pretend I never existed." My stomach twisted because that was exactly what I knew they could do. Dad grabbed Eli's backpack from the floor and shoved it into his chest. "Pack your things and be gone by tonight," he ordered without looking away. The word "gone" landed harder than every other part of that sentence. Eli's shoulders dropped for 1 second, then lifted again like he reset something. He walked down the hall and I forced myself to follow behind. My legs felt like they belonged to some extra in a bad drama. Eli started grabbing clothes and stuff he cared about and tossing everything inside. He moved fast, like if he slowed down he might crash into reality. "You knew I would tell them eventually," he said as he stuffed shoes inside. The words punched me because I had secretly hoped he never would. I thought maybe they would soften later or I would move first. Hearing that plan out loud made me sound weak even to myself. Eli paused with a shirt in his hands and looked straight at me. "So which side are you on?" he asked and waited. The question felt heavier than the packed bag sitting open on his bed. I opened my mouth and only air came out and no answer. Mom appeared in the doorway and her eyes were already rimmed with tears. "You will not drag your sister into this," she snapped and gripped the frame. "She has a future and you will not wreck it too." Her words hit me like praise and threat wrapped into one messy package. Eli slung the backpack over his shoulder and brushed past both of us. He did not touch Mom, and she flinched anyway like he had. I followed again because I could not stand the idea of letting go. Every step down that hallway felt like we were walking out of something permanent. Dad waited near the front door with his keys already clutched in hand. He held them like proof that he still controlled how this story ended. "You walk out tonight and you are choosing against us," he warned quietly. I felt that line wrap around my throat like a rope I tied myself. Eli opened the door on his own and stepped onto the small porch. For a heartbeat, he stayed half inside like he was testing the edge. He turned his head toward me, and his eyes were asking everything. I lifted my hand a little, then dropped it again without saying a word. Dad reached past me and pulled the door shut with one hard motion. The latch clicked and the sound went straight down my spine and stayed there. Momsy loosed her eyes and leaned against the wall like she finally exhaled. I stared at the wood in front of me and imagined Eli's face on the other side. A few seconds later, he knocked once and my name came through muffled. The sound punched through me more than any shouting ever had. "Do not open that door," Mom warned as her fingers dug into my wrist. I stayed rooted while every instinct screamed at me to tear the lock away. Dad walked back to the living room and turned the television up loud. The noise flooded the house, but it did not drown out Eli's voice. He called through the door that he would be fine and we should not worry. Those words haunt me more now than his coming out ever did. Back then, I let them wash over me like background noise from some other life. I sat on the couch with my hands locked together and watched the door. Every second I stayed there, I chose them a little more over him. On the other side of that wood, my brother stood alone in the dark. I pressed my ear to their bedroom door and held my breath. No more voices, just the dull rhythm of their TV on low. When I was sure they had settled in for the night, I backed away slowly. Every step toward the front hall felt like I was walking across a minefield. At the door, my fingers found the chain and just stopped there. I kept hearing Mom's warning replay, like she had recorded it for me. "Do not open that door, do not help him, do not ruin your life." My hand still moved anyway and slipped the chain free with a tiny scrape. The deadbolt turned louder than I wanted, and I froze in place. I waited for Dad's footsteps, for Mom to call my name sharply. Nothing, just that low murmur from down the hall and my own pulse. I eased the door open a crack and felt the cooler night air push in. Eli sat on the porch step with his bag against his knees. He had his phone in his hands, screen lighting his face in harsh flashes. When the hinges creaked, he jerked his head up like he expected someone else. His shoulders dropped a little when he saw me standing there barefoot. "So you came," he murmured and rubbed at his eyes with his palm. The words stung because they carried this tiny scrap of hope I had delayed. I stepped outside and pulled the door mostly shut behind me, leaving it unlatched. Some part of me still needed a fast way back into that house. "You should not be out here alone," I whispered like volume changed anything. He let out this short, rough laugh that landed straight in my gut. "I am technically not alone," he said and nodded toward the closed door. "Your loyalty is just on the other side right now." That line hit harder than any shout would have hit. I wanted to argue and say I was trying my best. The truth was I had sat on the couch for hours frozen. I shoved that image away because it made me feel small and selfish. "I brought you some stuff," I said, and my voice sounded thin. His gaze dropped to my empty hands and then back to my face. I realized I had come out without anything, just instinct and guilt. "I will grab it now," I added and reached for the doorknob again. He caught my wrist before I could go back inside and held on. "Wait," he whispered, and his grip was warm and a little shaky. "If they see you talking with me, this gets worse for you." I looked at his hand on mine and knew he meant every word. "Let me worry about that," I told him and eased free. I slipped back into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed. The lock clicked behind me, and the familiar walls felt tighter than before. I moved on my toes, counting each step like it might betray me. Their door stood half open with light spilling along the floor. I could hear low murmurs, broken by the occasional cough from Dad. They were still awake and still talking about my brother outside. The thought made my chest clamp and my feet move even faster. In the hall closet, I dug out my old camp roll and a worn blanket. Fabric scratched my arm and I almost knocked over a stack of boxes. I caught them in time and stood there holding my breath again, twitchy. From their room came a soft laugh that did not feel happy at all. I grabbed a charger from my desk and stuffed it into my sweatshirt pocket. My hands shook enough that I nearly dropped it on the floor twice. Every little sound felt like a siren in that quiet, narrow hallway. Still, I kept going because the idea of him out there empty-handed felt worse. On the way back, I passed the family photos mounted along the wall. I did not stop, yet my eyes still brushed over Eli's graduation picture. For a second I imagined Mom quietly taking it down in the morning. The thought made me tighten my grip on the bundle until my knuckles hurt. At the door I paused again and listened for movement behind me. Nothing changed inside the house, yet everything felt different anyway. I slid the lock aside and stepped out with the blanket and roll clutched tight. Eli rose slowly when he saw what I carried, like it cost him energy. "You really went back for me," he muttered, and his mouth twitched upward. I handed him the bundle and he took it carefully, almost reverently. "It is not much," I said, and hated how apologetic I sounded. He hugged the roll to his chest and studied my face for a beat. "You know this means you are choosing them, right?" he asked quietly. The words came out calm, but his eyes flickered, worn and raw. "If I step off this porch tonight and you let me go, that is what you are doing." My throat worked around air that did not want to go down. I wanted to yell that it was not that simple at all. There was rent, school, the future I had been trained to protect. There was every warning about being ungrateful and reckless and dramatic. All of those voices crammed together inside my head and fought him. "I am trying to keep you safe first," I whispered, and it sounded hollow. His jaw tightened and he stared out toward the street instead of me. "Safe would be a couch and a roof and a locked door," he answered. "Not a pillow against a wall behind some grocery store." That last part hit me like a punch I saw coming anyway. He had already thought through his plan, if you could call it that. I realized he had more nerve right now than I did in my own hallway. That realization burned, and I still did not move to open our door. "You can stay here tonight," I blurted and grabbed for the knob again. The sentence hung between us like something fragile I might break myself. "If you keep quiet, I can sneak you into my room and figure it out later." It sounded brave until I pictured Dad's face in the morning. Eli watched me with this strange mix of hope and doubt wrestling. "You mean sleep while they think I vanished?" he asked after a moment. "If they find me in there, you lose everything they promised you." The way he said promised made it clear what he thought of those gifts. My fingers tightened on the knob until my nails dug into my palm. I could almost feel Dad's voice in my ear from the kitchen earlier. "Help him and you lose your place here, lose your college, lose us." I hated that those threats still held weight, yet they did. "You should not have to pay that price," Eli murmured and set the bundle down. He stepped closer, and his eyes were suddenly level with mine and steady. "I will figure something temporary, I always do, remember." The smile that followed looked like it hurt more than it helped. I shook my head and took his hand again without thinking first. "This is not some rough week you walk off," I answered. "They meant it tonight, they are not just scaring you." My voice cracked on the last word, and he noticed, of course. "I know exactly how serious they are," he replied and pulled his hand free. They watched me carry my bag down the hall and did not blink once. They locked that door in my face and never checked if I stayed nearby. Trust me, I got the message the first time. I flinched because that detail slammed into me harder than I expected. I had heard the lock, but I had not thought about their side of it. They had turned away from their own kid and never looked through the peephole again. That knowledge settled heavy and ugly right behind my ribs. "Let me at least walk you somewhere less exposed," I offered more desperately. "To a friend or a bus stop or anything, not this porch." If I kept moving with him, I could delay sending him off alone. Eli shook his head and bent to pick up the roll again. "You need to stay in there and pretend you slept through this," he insisted. "If you come wandering around town after midnight, someone will notice." There was a bitter humor in his tone that made my skin prickle. "You are still the golden one, whether you like it or not." That label made me want to scream and throw the lock open wide. I was not golden, I was just scared and practiced at compliance. Inside the house, my phone buzzed once from the coffee table. I pictured Mom checking it in the morning and asking innocent questions. "I have some cash saved," I told him and reached for my pocket again. I pulled out a folded stack of bills I had meant for textbooks. He stared at it like it might burn him if he took it. "Maya, you do not need to do that," he whispered, though his fingers twitched. "Take it," I urged and shoved the money into his hand firmly. I can find another job, I can figure the school stuff out later. The idea terrified me even as I voiced it with shaky bravado. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it and slid the bills away. Text me when you get wherever you end up, I added quickly. If I do not hear from you by morning, I am calling everyone I know. That promise was big and messy, and I had no plan behind it. He still nodded like it gave him more comfort than the cash. For a second neither of us spoke and the quiet pressed down. The house loomed behind me and the street stretched out ahead of him. It felt like I stood exactly between two versions of my life. I knew even then I could not stand there forever. All right, Eli breathed and hitched the strap of his bag higher. I will try the 24-hour store and maybe that diner later. He said it lightly like he was planning a late movie night. I knew he was lying to keep me from crying on the porch. You sure you do not want to crash here just one night? I tried again. The question slipped out like a last-ditch flare I fired too late. Eli glanced at the closed door behind me, and his mouth twisted. If I crossed that threshold tonight, I might never leave, and then what? His point landed deep because I could see it too clearly. Dad waking up to find him on the couch and exploding all over again. Mom crying in the kitchen while calling relatives for backup opinions. Me standing in the middle trying to hold everything together with my bare hands. At least let me watch you until you turn the corner, I requested. It sounded childish and he smiled more genuinely at that. Fine, but only if you go inside as soon as I disappear, he replied. He stepped back off the porch and onto the sidewalk with firm steps. He adjusted the roll under his arm and tucked the blanket tighter. His figure looked smaller once he left the little square of shadow by the door. He took a few strides, then stopped and faced me again. Do not let them turn you into a stranger, he called softly. The words hit on a different level and almost knocked me forward. I gripped the doorframe with one hand to keep from running to him. I will not, I answered, though even then I was not totally convinced. He held my gaze for a beat longer, then turned away for real. I stayed there watching his back move farther under the scattered streetlights. He did not look over his shoulder again, which somehow hurt more. When he finally reached the end of the block, he lifted one arm briefly. Then he vanished around the corner and left me alone with the open door. Inside, the hallway felt colder as I stepped back and pulled the door shut. The chain slid into place with a faint clink that made my stomach flip. I rested my forehead against the wood and tried not to cry too loudly. In the bedroom down the hall, the TV still hummed like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed again, and this time I rushed to grab it. A new message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. Got a spot behind the store for now, we'll check in tomorrow. I stared at those words and my thumb hovered over the reply box. I typed out a dozen different responses and erased each one halfway. Call me if anyone bothers you. I can pick you up if you change your mind. I am sorry I let you walk away. In the end, I sent just 4 words. Tell me you are okay. The message went through and I watched for the little typing bubble. It never showed up and the screen finally dimmed while I waited. That was the moment I felt something fundamental crack inside me. Not when he came out, not when they locked the door. Right there on the couch with my phone in my palm and no answer. I knew this was not the last time I would fail him that week. Knuckles rapped on my door before the sun was fully up. I jerked awake, heart already racing like I had been chased. Before I could answer, my door opened and my parents stood there. Mom's arms were folded tight and Dad's jaw looked locked in place. Come to the kitchen, we need to speak as a family. I followed them down the hallway with my stomach climbing into my throat. Dad took his usual chair and rested both hands flat on the table. Mom stayed standing for a second, then sat across from him without meeting his eyes. My phone was still in my pocket, pressing against my leg like a secret. Sit down, Dad said, and my knees bent before my brain caught up. No one moved for a few heartbeats and the quiet buzzed between us. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and stared straight at me, steady and unblinking. What happened last night was not how we raised you or your brother. The word brother twisted inside me in a way he probably did not notice. We will not let that chaos continue inside this home. Mom flinched at the word chaos and clasped her hands tight on the table. He turned his back on everything we taught him and walked out, she said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed sharp in a way that scared me. I barely slept, thinking about the damage this could do to you. The way she stressed you made it very clear who still counted. Dad leaned forward and lowered his tone, like he was sharing something wise. We love you both, that will never change, understand that first. My chest tightened because I already knew what usually followed that line. But love does not mean we support destructive choices or throw out our values. He watched my face closely, hunting for any sign of disagreement. He made a decision to live in sin and rebellion, Dad continued. We ought enable that and still look ourselves in the mirror. My thoughts snagged on the word enable like it was some legal term. Helping him now would mean you are co-signing everything he is doing. That sentence landed heavy, and I could feel where this was going. Mom finally dragged her gaze up to meet mine and held it. You are still under this roof, still part of this household, she said. We worked too hard to give you opportunities he is throwing away. Her eyes shone, but there was something hard underneath the shine. I cannot watch you toss your future in the trash for him. My phone buzzed against my thigh, and I almost jumped out of my chair. Both of them looked down at the same time like they felt it too. I pressed my leg against the seat, trying to muffle the second vibration. Who is that? Dad asked, eyes narrowing just a little. Probably Jordan, I answered quickly, using the first name that came to mind. Put it on the table, he said and nodded toward my pocket. I pulled the phone out slowly, praying the screen stayed dark. Of course it lit up with a new notification right as I set it down. An unknown number flashed with a preview line that made my breath stall. Hey, can I shower somewhere this morning, please? I flipped the phone face down so fast it scraped across the surface. Mom's mouth tightened, like she had caught the edge of the message anyway. Is that him? She asked, looking at me instead of the device. My spine went hot, then cold, like someone ran water straight through it. I swallowed hard and nodded because lying felt pointless in that moment. Dad reached over and drew the phone toward him with 2 fingers. He did not flip it back over, just tapped the case once thoughtfully. This is exactly what I was talking about 5 minutes ago, he said. He will drag you into his mess one favor at a time. His hand stayed on the phone like he was weighing whether to smash it. Mom leaned closer, voice dropping to something softer and more dangerous. If you start sneaking him things, we cannot protect you from consequences. Your college fund is in our hands, and so is this roof. She let the words sit there, heavy and obvious, without apologizing. If you side with him, you are choosing away from us. I wish I could say I stood up right then and pushed back. Instead, I stared at my hands and watched a tiny tremor in my fingers. They were not saying anything new, but this was the first time it felt official. Like a contract I had never agreed to was being slid in front of me. Choose comfort and school, or choose your brother sleeping behind some building. Dad finally turned the phone screen side up and glanced at the preview. His lips pressed together into a thin line that made my stomach twist. He is already asking for more, he muttered and shook his head slowly. Today it is a shower, tomorrow it is rent and bills and secrets. He pushed the phone back toward me like it was contaminated. I am not heartless, he added and looked straight through me. If he comes to his senses and repents, this door is open. The word repents made my teeth clench so hard my jaw ached. But until then, we have to hold the line as a family. Can we rely on you, or are you going to undermine this? My tongue felt thick and useless while they waited for my answer. I thought about Eli's message, about the water at home running freely. I pictured him trying to wash up in some gas station bathroom instead. The image burned my throat in a way words could not fix. Still, my mouth opened and something small and cowardly came out. I will not cause trouble, I heard myself say in a flat voice. I did not say I would refuse him, just that vague, useless line. Dad seemed satisfied anyway and leaned back with a slow nod. Good, he said, like he had settled a business deal in his favor. Mom exhaled loudly, like someone had just removed a weight from her chest. She came around the table and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. Her hug was tight and shaking, and it should have comforted me. You are our blessing, she whispered against my hair, warm and intense. You always make the right choices, you are not like him. The comparison lodged deep, half praise, half knife, hard to pull out. Over her shoulder, I stared at the phone lying between water rings. The preview still glowed, that single request staring up at me accusingly. I wanted to break out of her grip and run straight out the door. To call Eli and say, forget everything, come wash up here now. Instead, I let her hold me and nodded like a good obedient child. When they finally released me, Dad cleared his throat again and stood. Delete that message, he instructed, already turning toward the sink. If he contacts you again, you tell us immediately, no secrets. The way he said secrets made me think of locked drawers and hidden bottles. I knew this was not about transparency, it was about control. I picked up the phone with fingers that did not feel like mine. The text thread was open now, his message sitting alone above the keyboard. Somehow seeing it full size hurt even worse than the tiny preview. Hey, can I shower somewhere this morning, please? No emojis, no jokes, just that quiet, desperate little line. My thumb hovered over the delete option and my stomach rolled hard. If I erased it, I could pretend I never saw it right. If I answered, I might lose everything I had been warned about. I exited the message instead and locked the screen with a snap. Coward's move, I know, but in that moment it felt like survival. I told them I needed to get ready for class and left the kitchen. The hallway felt shorter and meaner as I walked back to my room. Behind my door, I finally let my face crumple and covered it with my hands. My phone buzzed again on the bed, and I stared at it like it might explode. Another message flashed when I picked it up with shaking fingers. Ignore the shower thing if it is complicated, no worries. He had added a laughing emoji that made my chest hurt worse. Then another line appeared under it before I could answer anything. Just wanted to feel normal for 10 minutes, that is all. Those words stripped away every excuse I had just built. I sat down hard and started typing faster than I could think. Come here, I do not care what they said, I will cover you. I stared at it, heart jolting, hoping that brave version of me would win. Then I saw Dad's face again, heard Mom's voice saying college fund. My thumb shook once, then hit backspace until the screen went blank. New attempt. I cannot right now, things are tense here today, maybe later. Even reading it in my head sounded pathetic and full of lies. I almost sent it anyway just to send something. Instead, I watched the blinking cursor and felt more useless by the second. In the end, I sent nothing, which somehow felt even worse. 3 dots popped up under his last message like he was writing again. They disappeared, then showed up, then disappeared longer this time. Finally, a new bubble appeared, shorter than the others and quieter. Got it, stay safe. That was it, no guilt, no pressure, just those 2 dry lines. I wanted him to rage at me and call me out properly. Tell me I was abandoning him to keep scoring points with our parents. Instead, he let me off the hook, at least on the screen. Which somehow made the shame sink deeper under my skin. I tossed the phone onto the pillow and it bounced once, then settled. From the hallway, I could hear Dad running the shower for himself. Water hammered against tile while my brother hunted for a sink somewhere. The contrast made my throat tighten until I had to breathe through my teeth. I knew right then that money was not the only price they were asking. My phone rattled across the nightstand and yanked me upright. The screen glared 1:42 a.m. and Jordan's name filled the display. I knew before I answered that this call would not be casual. Where are you? I croaked, voice already tight in my own ears. I am behind the Price Mart near campus, Jordan rushed out. Your brother is here and it looks rough. Those words sliced through the last bit of sleep in my brain. I swung my legs off the bed and reached for my jeans with shaking hands. Define rough, I snapped, heart pounding so hard it blurred things. Jordan exhaled fast and the sound crackled over the tiny speaker. Some guys hassled him earlier and kicked his stuff around. He is awake, but he looks exhausted and kind of out of it. I did not ask why Jordan was even there at that hour. None of that mattered next to the image he had just dumped on me. Do not let him wander off, I said while yanking a hoodie over my head. I am coming right now, keep an eye on him. I eased my door open and listened for the usual house creaks. Nothing moved, which almost felt worse than yelling would have. I slipped my shoes on in the hallway, fingers fumbling with the backs. Each soft scrape on the floor sounded huge in that sleeping house. At the front entry, I grabbed the keys from their hook with slow care. I half expected my parents to appear and block the way again. No footsteps, no lights snapping on, just the faint hum of the fridge. It hit me that this might be my last time sneaking out like a teenager. The lock clicked and the night air pushed against me as I stepped outside. I did not pause on the step this time or glance toward the street corner. I walked straight to the car and climbed in with my chest burning. It felt like my body had finally decided which direction it belonged to. The engine turning over made me flinch, then feel weirdly relieved. Noise meant commitment, meant I was already too far in to back out. I reversed from the driveway and headed toward the main road fast. My hands gripped the wheel so hard they ached, but I did not loosen them. On the way there, I called Jordan back and put him on speaker. "Talk to me," I said, eyes locked on the empty stretch ahead. "He tried to joke when I got here," Jordan answered, voice tight. "But he keeps zoning out and his lip will not stop bleeding." My stomach lurched and the car seemed too small around me. "Did anyone call an ambulance?" I asked, though I knew Eli would refuse. "No," Jordan replied after a beat, like he already knew what I was thinking. He swore he was fine and freaked when I mentioned the hospital. I hated that I could picture that scene so clearly without seeing it. Him brushing off help with some weak joke, acting tougher than he felt. "Keep him talking until I get there," I said and pressed the gas harder. If a cop pulled me over right then, I honestly did not care. The shopping center appeared ahead faster than I expected. Most of the lot sat empty at that hour, which made everything feel exposed. I swung around the side toward the loading area where Jordan had described. Trash bins and crates crowded the back wall, but I only focused on figures. Jordan leaned against the wall with his hands jammed into his pockets. Eli sat on the ground beside him, with the roll I had given him half undone. Even from inside the car, I could see one cheek swollen and angry. He lifted his head when my headlights swept over and tried to straighten up. I parked crooked and climbed out before the engine even shut fully. "What happened?" burst out of me as I reached them in a few strides. Eli smirked, which looked painful with his split lip. "Relax, you should see the other guys," he muttered, then winced. Jordan shot him a look that said, "Knock it off right now." "Some drunk idiots came through about an hour ago," Jordan explained quietly. "They saw his stuff, started running their mouths, then shoved him around. I got here near the end and chased them off before it got uglier." Eli shrugged one shoulder like it really was nothing worth this fuss. "Free entertainment with my new outdoor lifestyle," he added and tried to chuckle. The sound cracked halfway and my chest twisted at how forced it sounded. "Seriously though, I am okay, you did not need to come racing out." I crouched in front of him and reached for his chin without thinking. He flinched on instinct, then let me tilt his face toward the lot lights. Up close the damage looked worse, purple creeping under the skin already. Seeing real bruises on him did something bad to my breathing. "You are not staying here another hour," I said, and my voice surprised me. It came out steady and sharp in a way I barely recognized as mine. Eli's eyes searched my face like he was trying to locate the old version. "I will figure it out," he started, but I cut across him. "Get in the car," I told him and jerked my head toward it. "No debates, no cute comments, I am done letting you camp in alleys." Jordan's eyebrows shot up because he was not used to this side either. Eli hesitated one beat too long, and that was enough to snap me further. "You can barely stand without leaning on that wall," I reminded him. "You think you will sleep tonight without someone else coming through here?" He glanced at his blanket, the bins, the empty pavement stretching behind us. I could see the calculation in his eyes, and it made me want to scream. "Fine," he muttered and pushed himself up with a small grunt. Jordan stepped in automatically and slid an arm under his elbow. Between the two of us, we got him upright and moving toward the car. Every slow step scraped my nerves because this was my fault too. We settled him in the passenger seat while he protested weakly. "I am messing up your life schedule again," he said with a crooked smile. I buckled his belt and ignored the way my fingers shook near his chest. You did that years ago by existing, I answered, trying for light and failing. Jordan leaned down to my window once I got in on my side. Text me later so I know he did not pass out, he told me. I would offer my couch, but my roommates are not exactly subtle. He grimaced like he could already hear their comments about Eli. I nodded and reached for his forearm in a quick squeeze. Thanks for not leaving him here alone, I said, noticing my voice soften. Jordan nodded once and stepped back as I shifted into drive. As we pulled away, I saw him still watching in the side mirror, worried. Eli rested his head against the seat and closed his eyes halfway. You are gonna get grilled when you sneak back in, he murmured. I did not sneak, I answered, eyes on the road, pulse still racing. I just left. There is a difference. I will deal with it later. What is the plan exactly? He asked after a quiet stretch of road. You drop me somewhere slightly less awful and sprint home for cover. I gripped the wheel tighter because he had described my pattern perfectly. That was the old plan, I said, and swallowed around the fear climbing. New words came out before I had fully rounded them in my head. I am getting you a room tonight, somewhere with hot water and a lock. As of this moment, that is not optional, so breathe accordingly. The silence after that felt different, heavier and brighter at once. With what money? He finally asked, side-eyeing me through swollen lashes. I pulled into a convenience store lot and killed the engine for a second. I opened my banking app and winced at the numbers glaring up. There is enough for a cheap place, I muttered, more to myself than him. You need that for books or some responsible nonsense, he pointed out. He looked tired and proud and stubborn all at once, which annoyed me. Tonight I need it for you not getting jumped again, I replied quickly. Tomorrow I can worry about pages and lectures and whatever. He stared at me like he was trying to detect a hidden script. This is a big shift for the family favorite, he said quietly. The phrase made my cheeks burn because it was not entirely wrong. Do not label this, I shot back, my throat tight, just let me drive. I restarted the car and searched for motels on my phone at a red light. One popped up a few blocks away with terrible reviews and low prices. Perfect in the worst possible way, still better than concrete behind dumpsters. I turned left when the light changed and headed toward that blinking vacancy sign. Inside the cramped lobby, the air felt stale and oddly warm. The man behind the counter glanced up from a small screen. I stepped closer and slid my card toward him with forced calm. One room for tonight, I said, 2 beds if you have it. His gaze flicked from me to the car still visible through the window. You both over 18? He asked, boredom laced with suspicion. I nodded too fast and forced my hands to stay still on the counter. He is my brother, I added, because the dynamic needed zero confusion. He grunted and tapped on his keyboard, then named a number that hurt. I signed the slip anyway and ignored the way my stomach knotted. There went another chunk of the future everyone kept preaching about. Right then, I cared more about the present bleeding quietly in my front seat. Key in hand, I helped Eli out of the car again and toward the stairs. Each step seemed to take more effort from him than he would admit. By the time we reached the landing, his breath had gone shallow and tight. That scared me more than the bruise because it hinted at deeper damage. Inside the room, he dropped onto the nearest bed and stared at the ceiling. Fancy, he muttered, voice dry, which somehow loosened my chest a little. If you squint, you can almost pretend this is a weird vacation. Yeah, I answered, kicking the door shut, the kind where you bleed on the sheets. He laughed once and then winced again, hand flying to his ribcage. Does anything feel broken? I asked, hovering at the edge of the mattress. He pressed his fingers gently along his side and hissed when he hit a spot. Probably just bruised, he said, though his face told a sharper story. I grabbed a clean towel from the bathroom and dampened it under the tap. Cold water flooded over my hand and snapped my focus back to basics. When I came out, he had one arm flung over his eyes like a shield. Move that, I ordered softly, standing near his shoulder with the towel dripping. He lowered his arm slowly and gave me a look that mixed gratitude and embarrassment. I dabbed at the cut on his lip and he sucked in a sharp breath. Too much? I asked, pausing, not wanting to cause more hurt. Keep going, he murmured. It stings, but it feels like care. That last line almost cracked me in half right there. Because he was right, and it highlighted exactly how starved he had been. My parents had thrown verses and rules at him, not ice and towels. I pressed the cloth gently to his cheekbone and blinked hard to keep seeing. You should have called me earlier, I muttered, shifting the towel to a new spot. He snorted, then hissed again as the fabric brushed a fresh scrape. Thought you had enough on your plate playing peacekeeper back home. He watched my face closely like he expected me to defend that title. I am done balancing their comfort against your safety, I answered. The sentence came out slower, like I was tasting each word. Whatever fragile thing I was protecting already cracked anyway. Saying it out loud made the truth more solid and more frightening. He studied me for a long second, eyes clearer now. So this is you picking a side? He asked, voice almost gentle. I let the towel drop into the sink behind me and straightened up. Yeah, I said quietly, looks like I am late, but I am here. Silence settled for a moment, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. He moved his hand until his fingers brushed my wrist and stayed there. It was a small touch, but it grounded the room more than any furniture. Better late than never, he murmured, and this time his smile. He was real. My phone lit up on the nightstand with a buzz that cut through everything. I did not need to see the contact to know who it was. Still, I flipped it over and watched the name flash with an incoming call. My chest tightened as I hit accept and lifted it to my ear. Where are you? Came immediately, no greeting, just raw authority. I glanced at Eli on the bed and he watched me with sharp focus. Out, I answered, which was technically true and completely useless. Do not play games, my father snapped. The car is gone, your room is empty. I exhaled slowly and sat on the edge of the other bed. I picked Eli up, I said, each word distinct. He was in bad shape. Silence pressed through the line so hard I thought the call dropped. Then his voice came back colder than I had ever heard it. We were very clear about boundaries, he said, each syllable clipped. You are encouraging his rebellion and dragging yourself down with him. I stared at the worn carpet and felt something harden in my chest. Someone already dragged him down literally, I answered. I am getting him off concrete. Bring him to the house and we will talk, he ordered after a second. The command tone triggered the same old automatic response in my muscles. For a heartbeat, I almost agreed just to stop the shaking in my hands. Then I pictured Eli limping through our entry while Mom cried an accusation. You threw him out, I reminded him, voice rising before I could stop it. You told him that door was closed until he magically changed. Now you want me to deliver him like a package for another beating. My voice cracked and I saw Eli flinch slightly at that word. We discipline because we care, my father shot back quickly. You are confusing compassion with enabling, which is dangerous. He always did love that word enabling like it excused everything. Helping him tonight means losing our support going forward, he added. There it was again, the threat they thought would always control me. I felt tears prick, but they did not fall this time, which surprised me. My gaze drifted to Eli's bruised face and the towel stained on the sink. When I spoke again, the words shook, but they did not retreat. Then I lose it, I said, barely above a whisper but steady. If the cost of staying in your good graces is abandoning him here, I cannot pay it. The line landed in the quiet between us like a glass hitting tile. On the bed, Eli's eyes went wide, like he had not believed I would go that far. Think carefully, my father warned, his tone dropping lower and more controlled. You are throwing away years of sacrifice over a phase he will regret. Phase, that word almost made me laugh in disbelief and rage. I am watching more regret on his face right now than on yours, I replied. For a second I thought he might soften, might ask if Eli was truly hurt. Instead he went straight back to numbers and threats like a reflex. Do not expect tuition help if you walk this path, he said. Do not expect a room waiting when this collapses around you. I hear you, I answered, and I meant it. I heard every warning. I am still choosing to stay with him tonight. The air in the room felt thick and strange as I waited for his response. When it came, it was a single sentence that cut deeper than the others. Then for now you are on your own, he said and hung up. The flat tone that followed hummed in my ear until I lowered the phone. For a moment, I just stared at the blank screen, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. Then I dropped the device on the bed and exhaled like I had run for miles. Eli shifted and pushed himself up on one elbow, watching me closely. "You did not have to go that hard," he said, subdued and serious. I barked out a short, humorless laugh and rubbed my forehead. "Apparently I did," I answered, "because soft has not worked all week." He studied me like he was seeing a stranger and his sister at once. "You know this means things are different now," he said quietly. "Not just with them, but with you and your whole track." His words hung there heavy, and I felt each one like weights. "I know," I replied, and this time there was no wobble. "I would rather be broke with a brother than comfortable pretending he vanished." Hearing myself say it out loud sent a shiver through me. Part terror, part relief, like stepping off a cliff and realizing there is ground. He sank back onto the pillow and stared at the ceiling again. "You realize I have nothing to contribute yet, right?" he muttered. "You just signed up for the deluxe stress package." I sat down on the bed across from him and let that sink in. "I am aware," I said, pulling my knees up against my chest. "I also know you are not a problem to fix, you are family." He turned his head toward me slowly at that last word. Yeah, I had thrown it around before, but it meant something new here. For a while we both stayed quiet, listening to muffled sounds through the wall. Voices drifted from another room, and some distant traffic rolled by outside. Normal noises of people who were not blowing up their lives at 2 in the morning. My world had shrunk down to one bruised face and a cheap keycard on the table. Eventually, Eli cleared his throat and broke the silence. "So what happens after checkout?" he asked, practical despite everything. "Do we just sit on the curb and rate our life choices?" The question was half joke and half very real planning. "I pick up shifts wherever I can," I answered slowly, thinking as I spoke. "You look for work that will hire you without asking too many questions. We crash where we can until something less temporary opens up." Hearing the outline made my stomach twist and my spine straighten at the same time. "You are really willing to trade campus life for that?" he asked. His tone was curious more than judging, which almost hurt worse. I thought about textbooks, dorms, lecture halls, all the stuff I had memorized as goals. Then I looked at my brother, actually present and breathing in front of me. "Turns out my picture of adulthood was missing a few key pieces," I said. "Like not leaving my own blood to get jumped behind a store." I met his eyes so he could see I was not exaggerating for drama. This was me owning what I had done and what I was fixing. He reached out again, this time gripping my hand tighter. "Whatever happens next, this is the first time I do not feel disposable," he said. His voice wobbled on that last word and he looked away fast. That single sentence punched harder than every threat from my parents combined. We lay there in separate beds as the hours crawled toward morning. My phone stayed dark on the blanket, no more calls from home. Every time I glanced at it, a different future flickered for a second. Then I turned my focus back to the person actually sharing the room with me. That night did not magically fix anything, obviously. Money was still short and arguments waited for later, and the world stayed messy. But that was the first time my actions matched what I claimed I believed. And once that switch flipped, there was no going back to safe silence. Rent money lay spread on the table when Eli walked in. He dropped his backpack by the wall and kicked off his shoes. "How bad is it?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Short," I answered, staring at the crumpled bills like they might rearrange. He pulled out a wad of tips and added them to the pile. For a second we both just watched the numbers form something almost enough. "If I cover the last bit, you handle groceries this week," he said. His tone tried for casual, but his jaw worked hard around the words. "Deal," I replied, even though I had no idea how yet. I swept the money together and slipped it into an envelope. Every month felt like a test we barely passed by 1 point. Still, we passed, and that stubborn little fact kept us standing. Later that night, I graded homework on the couch while Eli changed. He pulled on a clean shirt and checked his face in the mirror. The bruise along his cheekbone had faded to a faint shadow. Sometimes I almost missed it, then caught it again and felt my chest tighten. You do not have to pick up this shift, I told him. It is your only night off this week, you could sleep. He shrugged and grabbed his keys from the hook near the door. If I stay home, I will just do the math and panic. I knew exactly what he meant, and he knew I knew. We had turned worry into a nightly ritual the past few months. Counting, recalculating, making jokes that landed a little too flat. He opened the door, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. You can still back out, you know, he said, leaning on the frame. Go crawling home, tell them you were confused, finish school. My stomach twisted like it always did when he said that. I am more awake now than I have ever been, I replied. He smirked, then shot me a serious look that held longer. Then try to sleep tonight, he said, not just stare at ceilings. He stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed with a soft click. The tiny place felt too quiet as soon as he left the building. I tried to focus on my students, wrong answers, and messy notes. But my mind drifted back to the house we used to share. I pictured my parents eating dinner and pretending they had one child. The thought always felt like someone twisting a knife slowly, not fast. My phone buzzed on the table and snapped me out of it. Unknown number again, which did not mean much these days. I opened the message and saw a long block of text from Mom. She had changed phones but still typed like she was writing a newsletter. Your father is in the hospital, the first line read. I went cold from the inside out before I even finished it. She had added details about tests and doctors and lots of anxious phrases. Then one short sentence at the end. Sharp and clean and loaded. We would like to see you, please come by tomorrow. No mention of Eli anywhere in that entire message. No hint that she remembered she had another kid in this city. I stared at the screen until the words blurred and my eyes burned. The last time she had reached out was months earlier, begging for prayer. Talking about forgiveness and moral paths and how I could still return. This new message had a different weight, shorter and more direct. I could hear her voice in every carefully chosen word, asking and hiding. I read it 3 times, then set the phone face down. My brain shot in 2 directions at once and refused to pick. One part pictured my father in a bed with machines around him. The other imagined walking into that room and hearing them ignore Eli again. I got up and paced between the couch and the door until I felt dizzy. Every turn made the apartment feel smaller and hotter and less breathable. Finally, I forced myself to stop and lean both hands on the table. I knew I had to involve Eli, whether I wanted to or not. When he came back near midnight, I was still awake on the couch. He closed the door quietly when he saw the light still on. You look like you argued with a ghost, he commented, dropping his hat. Did I miss a haunting or just another email from them? Message, I corrected, my voice way too thin for that joke. He narrowed his eyes and reached for the phone near my knee. I held it out before he even asked and watched his face closely. His expression shifted from tired to blank to something much harder. He read it twice, then lowered the screen and blew out a breath. So this is the first time they mentioned him since everything, he said. He did not use the word dad, which hit me harder than I expected. His fingers tightened around the phone like he wanted to crush it. What do you want to do? He asked, gaze fixed on the wall. The question should have been simple, but it was not. I do not know, I answered, which was true and pathetic. I hated how lost I sounded in my own living room. You knew this was coming at some point, he continued, still not looking. Sick parent, dramatic text, invitation with his name and not mine. He laughed once without humor and shook his head. They always save the big plays for the audience that still listens. I flinched because I had been that audience my whole life. The good kid, the one who heard every speech and took notes. Now I sat here with rent envelopes and grease on my sleeves instead. Part of me mourned that version even while I knew she was dangerous. I think you should go, Eli said quietly, finally turning toward me. The words landed like a slap and a hug at the same time. I opened my mouth to argue before he could finish the thought. He held up a hand to stop the first protest on my tongue. Listen, he said, voice steady in a way mine was not. If something happens to him and you stay away, you will carry it forever. Not their choice is yours, that is how guilt works. He rubbed his thumb over a scar on his knuckle while he spoke. So I walk in there alone and accept their terms, I countered. I show up like the obedient child again and pretend you do not exist. My throat tightened around the idea and I felt anger spike. I cannot do that, not after the trash lot in the motel. Then do not pretend, he replied, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Go on your terms, not theirs, you are allowed to do that. Tell them you love him and also refuse their rules. He shrugged, then winced, like the motion still tugged at old bruises. You really want me to go back there for you? I asked. I knew how twisted that sounded even as I said it out loud. I am not a messenger service, I am barely holding myself together. My voice shook and I hated how close I was to crying again. Eli moved to the other end of the couch and sat beside me. I do not want you to do anything for me right now, he said. This is for you and whatever you need for your own head. He nudged my shoulder lightly, like he was afraid I might shatter. If he dies and you never look him in the face again, that is heavy. He swallowed hard on that word, and his eyes flickered briefly. And before you ask, no, I am not going, I am not ready. He pulled his hand back into his lap and twisted a ring around. You should be there too, I whispered, staring at his profile. You are his kid, whether he signs off on you or not. Eli shook his head slowly and stared at our chipped coffee table. I cannot handle another speech over a hospital bed, not today. Silence settled between us until the fridge clicked and filled it. Everything felt louder when neither of us dared talk for a minute. I thought about my father's voice on the phone cutting me off. I thought about him lying hooked up to tubes and maybe asking my name. Okay, I said finally, surprising both of us with how firm it is. Sounded. I will go, but I am not walking in there alone. Eli frowned and opened his mouth to object before I clarified. I will ask Jordan to come, I need at least one sane witness. Eli huffed a short laugh at that and shook his head. Dragging your friend into our family circus, brave move, he said. He already saw you on the ground behind a store, remember? At this point he is practically an honorary sibling, I replied. I texted Jordan before I could talk myself out of it. Hospital tomorrow, family drama, need backup, are you in? The dots popped up almost right away, then disappeared, then returned. Say when and where, I will bring coffee and bad jokes, he answered. The next morning my stomach refused food while I got dressed. I changed shirts 3 times and hated all of them equally. Nothing felt right for seeing a parent in a hospital bed. Too casual meant disrespect, too formal meant surrender, nothing worked. Eli watched from the couch with his feet tucked under him. You look like you are prepping for court, he commented. In a way I am, I muttered, pulling my hair into a knot. If they start cross-examining, please remember I am 22, not 5. He snorted and tossed me my jacket as I walked past him. If they push too hard, remember you have a couch to come back to, he said. We may be broke, but we are not empty. That line steadied my breathing more than any deep inhale could have. Jordan waited outside the entrance with 2 large cups in his hands. You look like you have not slept since Tuesday, he said bluntly. Accurate, I answered, taking a cup with shaky fingers. Thanks for volunteering to watch whatever this turns into. I grew up on messy reunions, he replied, bumping his shoulder against mine. Just point me toward the nearest exit if things explode. We walked inside together while my heart tried to climb out of my chest. Each step down the hallway felt like walking into a new version of myself. We found Mom in the waiting area near the nurse's station. She stood when she saw me, and for a second her face cracked. Then she noticed Jordan and pulled herself straight like armor snapping back on. You came, she breathed, eyes skimming over me like a scan. I did, I answered, standing my ground. This is my friend Jordan. He gave her a polite nod and stepped slightly behind my shoulder. She offered a quick strained smile that did not quite reach her eyes. We are grateful you made the effort, your father will be glad. There it was again, the we that did not include Eli in any way. I felt heat rise in my cheeks and forced myself not to look away. How is he? I asked, my voice catching on the last word. Her shoulders sagged a little, and she finally looked older than I remembered. The doctors are still running tests, she explained, clutching her purse strap. He is tired and scared and trying not to show it. She blinked quickly and wiped under one eye with her finger. He keeps asking if you got his messages, but he will not say it directly. I did, I replied, thinking of the last call where he hung up on me. Jordan shifted beside me, and I knew he was listening to every detail. Mom glanced around and lowered her tone, as if sharing a secret. He was wrong to cut you off like that, he knows it now. The admission stunned me for a second, and I almost believed her. Then I remembered exactly how confident he sounded when he exiled us. Is that why I got threatened over the phone for helping my brother? I asked. My voice sharpened, and a nurse looked over briefly before returning to charts. Mom's mouth tightened again, and the softness vanished from her posture. We were trying to wake you up, she answered, lifting her chin. You were making reckless decisions, throwing your future away for drama. She looked at Jordan quickly, like she regretted saying that in front of him. That drama is a person, I replied, my hands starting to tremble. A person you tossed outside after dinner and never checked on. I felt my throat burn and forced myself to keep eye contact. I will not sit at his bed today if we are pretending that never happened. Her face went pale at the word tossed and she gripped the chair back. I did not know he was on the streets, she whispered, shocked. You knew he was not inside, I shot back, anger finally surfacing. You heard the door close and you locked it anyway, remember that part. Jordan shifted his weight like he was ready to intervene if this escalated. I appreciated his presence more than I could ever say in that moment. Mom's eyes filled again, but this time the tears looked different. Less self-pity, more something like real regret, if I am being generous. We thought he had somewhere to go, she murmured, voice shaking. A friend, a plan, anything except a parking lot behind a store. She covered her mouth as soon as the words left mine. You saw him there, she added, almost to herself, horrified. I realized then she had not pictured the scene as clearly as I had. In her mind he was safe in some vague spare room somewhere. Yes, I answered, I picked him up off concrete at 2 in the morning. His face was swollen and he was still trying to make jokes. She closed her eyes and it looked like the ground shifted under her. Your father does not know that detail, she said after a moment. If he hears it right now, in that bed, it might break him. Her hands twisted together, small and desperate, waiting for my reaction. So you want me to walk in there and censor the truth? I asked. Smile, hold his hand, talk about school, never mention his son. The idea made my skin crawl and my palms go slick. I cannot visit him as the only child, that door is closed. I am not asking you to erase anyone, she protested, shaking her head. I am asking you to choose a kind time to raise certain topics. There is a difference between honesty and cruelty when someone is fragile. She stared straight into my face, daring me to call that manipulation. Jordan cleared his throat softly and spoke for the first time. Maybe we are all mixing up timing and truth here, he said. We can acknowledge mistakes without dropping bombs on a man with monitors. He glanced at me, giving me space to disagree if I needed. I hated that he made sense, at least partly, in that second. The part of me that had seen patients before through volunteer work knew that. You do not trigger full family reckoning at the edge of surgery. But another part of me wanted my father to feel at least one jolt. Can I see him alone first? I asked finally, still watching Mom. I promise not to yell, I just need to hear his voice. She hesitated, then nodded and gestured down the corridor. He is in room 12, I will wait here with your friend. Jordan squeezed my arm briefly as I passed, grounding me again. Text if you need extraction, he muttered near my ear. I gave a weak smile that faded as soon as I turned away. The walk down that hallway felt longer than every mile I had driven lately. Outside his door I stopped and pressed my palm against the frame. For a second I considered turning around and leaving the building. Going back to our apartment, crawling under a blanket, pretending I never came. Then I pictured Eli on that bed instead, and my hand found the handle. I stepped into the room and the sound swallowed me in a rush. Machines hummed softly and my father lay propped up, looking smaller. He turned his head toward the movement, and his eyes widened slightly. For a heartbeat we just stared at each other, both unsure who spoke first. You came, he said finally, voice rough from disuse and worry. The last time I had heard it, he was cutting me off entirely. Now it sounded like something had been scraped out from underneath. I was not sure you would after our last conversation, he added. I almost did not, I admitted, stepping closer to the foot of the bed. I thought about staying home and letting silence finish what you started. My hands curled into fists at my sides to keep them from shaking. But I kept imagining you vanishing and me stuck with only that phone call. He studied me like I was a stranger and a child at the same time. There are things I wish I had handled differently, he said slowly. The admission scraped its way out of him like it cost something real. I let fear and pride run the show, and that is not an excuse. Hearing him use words like fear felt surreal, almost disorienting. This man never admitted weakness when I lived under his roof. You kicked your son out of the house for being himself, I reminded him. I picked him up off pavement while you slept in a warm bed. His face tightened and he looked down at his hands on the blanket. I told myself I was protecting our home from corruption, he murmured. In truth, I was protecting myself from my own discomfort and ignorance. The word ignorance sounded heavy in his mouth, like he was not used to it. I did not rush to comfort him because part of me stayed furious. This was not a movie where one confession wiped away months of damage. Do you know where he is now? I asked, leaning against the back wall. Or did you stop imagining his location after the locks clicked? He winced like I had struck him, then forced himself to look up. I know he is with you, he said. Your mother told me the basics. I picture a small place and too many shifts and not enough rest. His eyes glistened and he blinked fast, embarrassed by his own emotion. That image is accurate, I replied, unable to stop a bitter edge. We share bills and instant noodles and late-night panic sessions. But we also laugh more honestly than we ever did around this table. I gestured at the tray near his bed, then dropped my hand again. He swallowed hard and shifted his weight against the pillows. I was wrong to force you to choose between us and him, he said. I thought drawing that line would bring you back to safety. Instead, it pushed you into something harsher that you did not deserve. Part of me wanted to tell him he was right, I did not deserve it. Another part knew I had chosen my side even if it all sucked. What do you want from me now? I asked, cutting through his regret. Because I am here, but I am not stepping back into the old script. He exhaled slowly and his shoulders dropped with that breath. I want to know if there is a path where we speak again, he replied. Where you visit without feeling like you are betraying someone. He hesitated, then pushed the hardest words out. And I want my son to know I still think about him daily. There it was finally, after all the months of absence and silence. He had not used Eli's name, but he had claimed him with that phrase. I felt my own anger crack open just a fraction at the edges. Thinking is a start, I said, my voice suddenly quieter. Showing him something real is the next step, that part is on you. I moved closer to the bed, stopping where I could see his face. I will not drag him here for another lecture in a hospital room. I would not dare, he answered, surprising me again with the wording. I have lost the right to summon him anywhere for a long time. I can only hope he might choose to see me if I keep owning this. He looked away briefly, like meeting my gaze had become too much. We sat in that heavy pause until a nurse poked her head in. 5 more minutes, she announced gently, checking his monitors. Time snapped back into focus, and I realized my legs ached from standing. I had to decide how to use those minutes, not just stand there. Here is the deal, I said, stepping into his line of sight again. If you want a relationship with me, you get all of me. That includes the brother you tried to erase after dinner one night. I will not hide him, not in this room, not anywhere else. His throat worked around another swallow, and he nodded slowly. I am not asking you to hide him, he said, voice low and rough. I am asking you to give me time to learn how not to fail again. I grew up one way and have been unlearning it far too late. That sentence landed deeper than I expected, because it was ugly and true. We were all late to this, stumbling through new roles without training. You do not get unlimited time, I warned. He is not waiting in stasis. Every day you hesitate, he builds a life where you are optional. I know, he replied, closing his eyes briefly, then opening them again. I feel that clock more clearly now than I ever did before. I would like to start by telling him I am sorry, even if he refuses to listen. He looked at me with something close to pleading, which I had never seen. The nurse returned and tapped her watch apologetically by the doorway. I nodded and stepped back from the bed, heart pounding even harder now. I will tell him you want to apologize, I said, moving toward the exit. But I am not guaranteeing a happy reunion, that part is up to him. As I reached the door, his voice reached me one more time. I am glad you chose him that night, he called softly. It means we raised at least one brave person, even if it cost everything. I froze for a second, then walked out without turning around, eyes burning. Mom stood up when she saw me and searched my face anxiously. How did it go? She asked, clutching her hands in front of her chest. Did he yell? Did he blame? Did he make you feel small again? Her questions poured out, a mix of dread and hope tangled together. He admitted he was wrong, I answered, still processing it myself. He did not pretend your version of the story was the only one. And he wants to tell Eli that he is sorry in his own words. Saying that last part felt surreal, like I was quoting someone else's father. Mom's shoulders slumped and she sank back into the chair behind her. I have prayed he would come to that point, she whispered, shaking slightly. I did not know how to reach you both without sounding controlling again. The irony of her worrying about control after everything nearly made me laugh. Jordan caught my eye and jerked his head toward the elevators. You ready to bounce? He asked, keeping his tone light for my sake. I nodded and turned back to Mom with my keys in my hand. I have to go, Eli is waiting at home and I do not leave him alone long. She flinched at the word home, like it stabbed in a tender spot. Tell him I would like to see him when he is ready, she said. Her voice trembled, but the sentence came out clear and deliberate. I know I have no right to demand that, only to ask. I will pass it on, I replied, not promising more than I could control. She reached for my arm but stopped halfway and dropped her hand. For the first time, she looked uncertain about touching me without permission. Tia. That small hesitation weirdly meant as much as any long apology could have. In the elevator, Jordan leaned against the wall and exhaled loud. That was intense, he said, stating the obvious but needing to. You did not crumble or scream, you just stood there and held your line. He looked impressed, which felt bizarre after the mess I had made. I thought my legs would give out, I admitted, staring at the floor. I kept thinking about the night I left him outside the door. The version of me back then would have folded in 5 seconds. Saying that out loud hurt, but it also felt like finishing a sentence. Back at the apartment, Eli sat cross-legged on the rug, pacing in place. He jumped up when we walked in and scanned my face nervously. Still breathing, I said, trying for a grin, no lightning, no disowning part 2. I kicked my shoes off and tossed my keys onto the table. What did he say? Eli asked, hands jammed deep into his pockets. I told him the important pieces, not every tear or pause. That Dad was scared, that he acknowledged fear and ignorance, that he wanted to apologize. I watched every muscle in Eli's face react in slow waves. He used the word ignorance, Eli repeated, almost in disbelief. That man used to think being wrong was a spiritual attack. He paced 3 steps, then back, then 3 more, mind racing. This sounds like a trap and a miracle at the same time. It can be both, I said, dropping onto the couch with a sigh. You do not owe him a single visit if you are not ready. But if you want even an inch of closure, this might be the opening. I hated how much the choice weighed, even when it was not mine. Eli stopped pacing and stared at the wall for a long moment. I am not going tonight, he decided, voice firm and steady. I need time to be angry without shaking and without apologizing. He turned to me, eyes bright and tired and completely alive. Tell him I heard that he wants to say sorry, he continued. Tell him I am not closing the door, but I am not at the handle yet. His metaphor made my throat constrict in a weird, painful way. He smirked, noticing, then dropped onto the couch next to me. We sat there shoulder to shoulder, listening to the pipes rattle. The apartment still felt cramped, and the bills still sat unpaid on the counter. Nothing about our practical situation had shifted in those few hours. Yet something in the air between us and the past had definitely moved. Sometimes people talk about big forgiveness moments like movie finales. One speech, one hug, credits roll, everyone healed and smiling and neat. That is not how this worked for us, not even close. We had phones full of old messages and heads full of mixed memories. I would love to tell you I marched him into that hospital the next morning. That my parents wrapped their arms around both of us and never messed up again. Reality is slower and meaner, and also oddly braver than that. We took it one text, one visit, one awkward conversation at a time. That night, though, we just leaned back into the battered couch together. Eli rested his head on my shoulder for the first time in years. "Thanks for choosing me when it counted," he murmured, eyes closing. I stared at the doorway and thought about which home I wanted that word to mean.